Hey, how's it going? Well, I finished my drawers here in the kitchen, and I love to show you how I made them, and maybe that'll inspire you to get busy on a project like this of your own. So stick around. Okay, well, let's get started on our project here. You can see I have the top drawer already made. You may be able to see on camera that the wood here is lighter than the more ambered lumber here, and that's because I have not sprayed this with lacquer yet. I'll wait until both drawers are done before I do that. So let's talk about the function of these drawers for a second. These drawers are an afterthought. We originally were just going to have shelves in there with books, but it's just too hard to access the back of a deep cabinet like that. And I also wanted to match the cabinet doors on the top of the desk. So I built this top drawer, and usually the first one is sort of the template for all of them to follow. So you tend to spend a little bit more time on the first part of a project so that you set a good pattern for the rest of the drawers and cabinet doors that you're going to be making. So this is a birch plywood. It's actually Baltic birch, and this is poplar, and this is a specialty piece of lumber that I used to make the handles, and I'll talk about that later. So let me open the drawer and explain a couple things. Well, I pulled a drawer out of our china cabinet so that I could show you a very typical traditional drawer, a thin solid wood front, and usually the front face is attached to the rather thin sides, half-inch, maybe thinner than that, by a dovetail joint, solid piece of wood, and the bottom of the drawer is relatively thin. So as you're pulling the drawer in and out, most of the stress is on this front joint. And because it's all natural wood, solid wood, lumber like that expands and contracts quite a bit with moisture. And so there are some construction techniques like this that have developed over the years to accommodate the movement in the wood. But I'm going to build our drawers in a much different way. So first of all, I'm thinking of a drawer in the kitchen or in the workshop, something like that. Not like you would think of a sock drawer or a delicate drawer like I just showed you. But I think of a drawer like this as being more or less a shelf that moves. So I want it to be very robust. And so the starting point is that I will be using 3/4 inch thick material for the sides and for the bottom and for the back and for the front. And that right away bulks up the capacity of the drawer. And I'll be using Baltic birch plywood. And one of the benefits of the Baltic birch is it is a very high grade and finished type of plywood, and very few openings or voids or cracks are in this lumber. And so for me, it doesn't have to be banded on the edge. I think the edge is quite attractive when it gets all finished. And this wood is not going to move seasonally, because with plywood, they sandwich grain going this way with grain going this way, and the movement of the lumber is very minimal. So by using 3/4 inch material, not only is it very strong and very stable, but a 3/4 inch wide piece of lumber like this is very, very useful in mechanically attaching one piece to the other. So basically I can take 2-inch screws and I can glue the joints and I can screw into the joint, and this drawer will survive an earthquake probably. And there's no need to do the type of old-fashioned joinery that you would have to do if this were all solid wood and would be warping or moving or cracking. Okay, so I'll be using mostly butt joints. And for the most part, the screws that I use will be hidden. You'll never see them. So that's the general philosophy that I'll be following. this drawer might be filled with books or heavy dishes or whatever, and I want it to be robust. And I would like it to be relatively easy to build with the tools that I have in the shop. I don't have planers and joiners and all sorts of really fancy woodworking material. So this drawer is easy to build, and you could easily do a project like this for yourself. So I'll try to go through the steps. Okay. Well, one last thing before we get started building, and that is the drawers and the doors in the cabinets I'm building are flush fit. In other words, it's even with the face of the cabinet and set in. This is not a standard way to make doors and drawers. It's a little more difficult than a standard. If you go to your home center and look at the kitchen area, most of the doors you will see are fit like this over the frame. And really the front of the door becomes the front of the cabinet. Sometimes there's almost no reveal of the facing. And this is a lot easier because you don't have to be absolutely perfect fitting the door with the cabinet. Whereas in this style of cabinet, this has to be fit exactly to the opening with a little bit of space left over. Now, it's not impossible to do that, and it's just what I prefer, although it is a little bit more work. But knowing that will affect all of your measurements and everything as to how you decide the front of the drawer or the front of the doors will look. So you have to decide before you start on that. Okay, so remember, I will be insetting flush fit. I will not be covering up the face like this with the doors. If you've never built any cabinets before, this would probably be an easier way for you to start. It's just not what I prefer. So let's start with getting a rough measurement. You need to know how deep the cabinet is. And this cabinet is approximately 19.5 inches to the face of the front. So our first task before we buy anything else really is we have to determine how the drawer is going to move. And in my case, I will be using a metal drawer slide. And so I need a rough measurement. So I want a little bit of wiggle room. So I'm going to purchase an 18-inch full extension drawer slide, and I'll show you that right now. The slides that I bought are full extension, side mount, soft close, 18 inches. And they look like this. In this particular case, there's no left or right. Both of these slides are identical, which means when you unlatch the front of the drawer, you will push one lever up and one down. There's a little release lever here, and so really you can put this on either side. There's no left or right. This particular part of the slide comes off, and so you'll mount this piece to the drawer, and this piece gets mounted to the cabinet. And these are rated at 75 pounds, which is more than enough for what I need. So for this project, I'm using 3/4 inch Baltic birch and 1/2 inch Baltic birch. It's actually metric, and so it's not exactly those dimensions, but it's close enough. And the slides here, these are about 1 3/4 tall. And most of these slides are about 1/2 inch, so you're going to lose 1 inch of your opening for the thickness of these slides. Now, this cabinet carcass is faced, and there's a recess here. So we have to build out a piece of lumber that makes the side even with the inside. So this drawer slide will sit like this. And so we have to fill this gap. So we can measure, and I'm going to cut a piece of 1/2 inch that's going to be approximately 18 inches long and approximately 1.25 inches high, so that I can screw this slide into that board. And here's a piece that I've already ripped for the correct thickness. So basically I'm going to cut this off so that this piece of wood will set into the side. So let's go cut that and take the next step. So I ripped this piece of 1/2 inch to the right height on the table saw here. And it's just the right height to handle the height of the drawer slide. So the next thing we want to do is cut it for length as we measured inside. Okay, there's the side piece, and the drawer slide will be fitting in here. And there's a tiny gap here, just a little bit proud of this opening, which is fine. You cannot have it recessed hiding behind here, or the metal of the drawer slide will chew up that frame. If this is sticking out too far, then you simply run it through the table saw and just trim a slight bit out of those side pieces. So I've pre-drilled these side pieces and countersunk for the screws. So now we need to attach these to the side. You want to make sure that they're relatively level. I have a cabinet as a guide, but if you don't have a floor on your cabinet, you want to make sure the sides are level so the drawer operates smoothly this way and front to back. And then when you're drilling for the screws to go into the side, you do not want to puncture the carcass and make a hole in your nice cabinet. So using some blue tape and pre-measuring how far you can go before you get into trouble is always advised. So let me screw these in and then we'll fit for the slides. And then for a little added extra security, I usually cut the tips off these screws with a pair of pliers. So what we have to do now is mark the location of the large part of our slider, which will get screwed into this board that we just put in there. So in my case, the front of the drawer will be flush with the front of the slider, and then the trim piece will take us flush to the front of the trim on the cabinet. Now we'll be able to make some micro adjustments later, but we want to kind of rough that in. And so with that slide in the right position, we want to go ahead and mark that location here, because I'm going to slide this piece out so that I can mark the holes. And then I will actually remove this piece, and it'll be easier for me to drill it out on the workbench and then bring it back in and then mount this to the side. Okay? Okay, now that these are all fitted to the sideboards, I'll pull the metal back off and then install them in the correct order in the cabinet. So let's go do that. We're ready to take some measurements for our drawer. Hopefully, unless something went terribly wrong, we won't have to take these side sliders and boards out again. And I'm going to round the drawer size down to 17.5 deep. The sides of the drawer will be 5.5 inches. Let's not worry about the front just right now. But the most critical measurement, one that we don't have any play in, is side to side, because those slides are fixed. So we could take a measurement, or what I prefer to do is to take two pieces of wood like this, snug it up, not super tight, but snug, and we'll just pop a clamp on there. And that's our measurement. No numbers needed. We'll just measure that off for the width of our drawer. So here's how we'll figure the length of the drawer. We said it was going to be 17.5 deep, but that's going to include the back and the face of the drawer, not the trim. So to make things easy and not have to do a lot of subtraction or addition, I just placed a piece of wood against the fence on the table saw, laid our bottom on the saw, and added a front piece. And I was able to measure that out at 17.5. So let's do the same for the width, because that's the most critical dimension. So in a similar fashion, here are our two pretend sides to our drawer, and this is the bottom. And our measuring stick is for the full width of the drawer, including the two sides. But this doesn't help us too much because we can't see how we need to trim the bottom piece. I had rough cut it before when I made the other drawer. So the best way to do this is to take both sides and put them on one side of the bottom, and then put our measuring stick here, and where this ends will be where I must trim to size this bottom piece. If your piece was a much wider piece, that's still where you would rip it on the table saw. So let me mark that and I'll slide it through the table saw. Here's our bottom piece. There's one side, and here's the other, and you can see the two sides are the same length as the bottom. So let's cut the back, and then we'll talk about the front. And we'll use the box itself to show us where to mark and cut the back of the drawer. This part of the slide is removable from the rest, and this is going to mount on the side of the drawer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply take a measurement from the bottom of this detachable portion to about a 1/2 inch below the top of the drawer opening, and that will be the height of the front panel of our drawer. So that'll be 11.5 inches. Roughly a 1/2 inch clearance all the way around. And there are all the pieces that we need for our drawer. We've got the front, and by the way, when I cut the piece out for my top drawer, I reserved a piece and so the grain would match, so the bottom drawer and the top drawer face would look reasonably similar as far as grain goes. So we've got our two sides, our back, the bottom, and the front. And what I want to do now is drill and screw this together and make sure that all of the screw heads will be hidden either by trim or by the drawer slides. And then I'm going to mount the removable part of the drawer side to the sides of the drawer, and we'll check to see how the fit is. I'm not going to glue anything right now. I want to make sure the drawer fits first. So let me get busy and sink some screws. I'll be using 2-inch screws into this 3/4 inch plywood. Well, this video is getting pretty long, so why don't we stop here and pick it up in the next video. Thanks for watching.